we're going to go for about another half hour, and then we're going to have lunch. But Don wanted to say something, and then I'm going to ask a general question, but go ahead.
You know, I really appreciate the discussion that we've had, but there are a few things I want to talk about. One is farming is hard work. I mean, it's really hard work, and that's why there are a lot of reasons why our young people are leaving the farm, and part of it's hard work and part of it's opportunity. And there are a lot of other reasons why rural communities are shrinking. You know, we used to have I'm from a community of 3,500 people. We had a very vibrant community. We had the Western Auto. We had 3, 5, and 10 stores. Well, you know, when the big box stores went in, you know, 25 miles away, it made it very difficult for small business owners to survive. And so, you know, the communities shrunk. And that's not going to change. That's not going to go back, because most people with limited incomes are going to shop where they can make the most for their dollars. But the other thing, as a farmer, you know, I don't set my price. I'm a price taker. I would love to put a price on a commodity. Paul is going to talk in the next meeting, and I know he would like to be able to put a price on his. And so competition drives these prices. And one of the reasons there's probably 400 crops in California is everyone needs to find a niche to be profitable. And so it's just the way it is. And another important thing, we've talked a lot about politics, and I've spent too much time in Washington over the years, and if there's one thing I've learned about politics, it's evolutionary with a capital E. And it's not revolutionary. And so when we start talking about these political problems, you know, they are going to take a lot of time. And as I mentioned previously, if I have a problem, or I'm trying to figure out, you know, what new cropping I might have an opportunity, I go here and I get results right away. And so, you know, we're talking about the ends of the spectrum here, and, you know, if we want to wait 50 years to try to deal with this politically, I mean, you know, we're going to make progress, but it's going to be slow. And we have people that need food now, and so we need to figure out, how are we going to get, if it's infrastructure, if it's seed, or if it's resources, where they need to be? And, you know, we're still fighting politics in this state, this nation, and, you know, you even have a wreck sometimes and you can't solve the political problem. But that doesn't mean we cannot address the need at the family level in some other way.
So of the many things people told me that I should talk about more and better, some of them were actually true. And I think one of them is we're talking about crops a lot, and there's something else about farming, which are animals. And we haven't really talked about how do you raise animals, how do you encourage animals. Should we actually try to be focusing less on animals? And when I say we, it's the universal we, because as I said in my little thing, and other people say too, you eat a lot of meat, they consume a lot of water, they take a lot of land, they eat a lot of grain. None of that stuff is highly available and cheap. And an answer also for your health is to eat less meat. But in the developing world, you know, I think America certainly has a stellar reputation of going in and telling other people what to do, and we're not really in a position to instruct people how to eat.
It's funny because the last panel I sat on began with somebody kicking off with the statistics about a pound of meat, you know, versus a pound of grain, and how many calories and how much water and all those things. And the caveat there is that's industrially raised beef in the United States. So when we let me finish.
It still takes a lot of land. It still takes a lot of land.
If you know, and so if we're looking at agriculture and rural economies in a broader sense of not just being about how many calories you produce, but also about livelihoods.
Yeah.
You know, of the poorest billion or so people on the planet, 70% are dependent in some way on livestock. 14% of, I guess it's the employed population of the world, work directly in dairy, right? And so, and the kinds of industrial, high input, grain-fed systems that we've developed in this country, where we have lots of land and lots of resources, or did when we were developing these systems, those aren't a relief on scarce resources in those countries. In many cases, those are a direct threat to those very poorest people, because they're not going to all of a sudden own a 500 head, milking operation. And so I think for us, eating less meat is probably not a bad idea. But I think globally, there's probably more attention needed on the needs of smallholder, arable land, arid lands, pastoralists, and how to support more sustainable practices for them.
I think the key word is sustainable, and I was going to ask somebody what that means because I have no idea. But there are ways to raise animals, and there are other ways, and some are useful and some are horrendous, and we do the horrendous mostly. But I still think even if you raise animals in a humane way and having them not grain-fed, it is a shift that's happening that I wouldn't necessarily say is a totally positive change. And I also don't know what the outside world can do to tell individuals in countries how to eat.
On the top.
Just two things. One is in terms of when we talk about, say, a country like India, and we think that because the income is increasing, people are beginning to eat more meat. It is true that you might have a more full diet, but actually evidence points to it's not that suddenly a culture which was not eating beef and other things is suddenly starting to eat that. At the same time, India has become a place which is exporting from eggs to chicken to many African countries, which is ludicrous. I mean, in Sierra Leone, I've seen like these trays and trays of eggs that have come in from India where they have their own chicken. So talk about markets being destroyed and livelihoods of the farmers there being destroyed. So I think we have to look at the markets, even if it's a tough issue, takes long time, it's political, and we don't like politics. Like it or not, you got to deal with it. Second, I think we have to talk about pastoralists, because if you're talking about food security in our work, whether it is Kenya, where the Maasai tribes are facing a huge big threat right now as a game resort is coming in and they will start evictions as we speak. In case of Ethiopia, which has been a way of life, where they depend on their food security on these cows, and it is not just sacred cows, but they're also for the cattle is necessary for the nourishment. Those ways of life are being destroyed, whether it's the Bodis and the Mursis and the Suris in Lower Omo, they are being cleared from the lands where these agricultural plantations are going to come in the name of food security. So as long we have an agricultural model which is upside down and backwards and not dealt with because it is political, we're not going to be dealing with food security. And we need to have the pastoralists, and then to be knowing about the way of life. It was suggested we should not just be going there as tourists, but actually spend real time to understand. So if we don't have these people on the table and we're designing food security programs, I'm afraid they are going to be on the menu.
Okay.
To respond to your comment about the way that we tell people what to do, I think to some degree we're already doing that through structural adjustment policies and through the way international corporations operate in developing countries. If you look at the prevalence of CocaCola, you can find it in the most rural and the most isolated places on Earth, and Coca-Cola has managed to permeate these markets. So I think to some degree, the United States corporations already are very much telling people how to eat and what to eat.
I don't think that we, whoever we are going to have a great deal of success in making Coca-Cola go away. I think we should figure out other ways to help or get out of the way. And one of the things that seems to be happening in this group is there's some people who think a kind of, top-down governmental approach or international approach is useful and preferable. And it seems like some feel that that would actually be the worst possible thing. And I don't know how we resolve that, except that it probably does need some resolution in some countries. Because when we talk about encouraging smallholders in South India or in African countries, what do we mean?
Well, I'd like to respond to that, just for a moment. We've been talking, obviously, top-down. The word bottom-up hasn't really come up, and that's what we really need to be thinking about, how to enable the bottom-up. And what we can do is to begin to recognize the social groups that are actually forming. So Via Campesina is an example of this, of a social movement of agriculturalists, small agriculturalists, who are trying to get their rights, and then it became internationally recognized. There may be other groups like this that are going on right now that need to be heard. So part of what we can do from bottom-up point of view is listen, because we can learn a lot from these other people who have important things to say to us. And then we can begin to enable those people that we've been talking about in the panel to in a sense, be understood, and we can begin to work with them in a much more effective ways.
We kind of blew
Brian,
by.
I want to let Brian speak because I have a feeling that I think we need help from above. And I don't believe in God either, so that's you.
There's chaos theory.
I think we're just dealing with a lot of really difficult issues in interesting ways, and they're strands. Somehow eventually, this planet needs to weave those strands together if we're going to succeed. Not a small thing for you to talk about.
I'm just trying to pretend I've just arrived here from Andromeda Galaxy, and I've been listening, and you know, what have I learned? Because I come from a world of studying stars and galaxies. So the just a couple things. One is looking back over the history of life. It is amazing that this group of people here, right, is concerned about the suffering of other members of their group. And that is something really new. I mean, you rarely, like if you walk around California, you rarely come across a little group of horses worried about the horses in, Argentina. But I mean, here we are. So that, I mean, I'm just saying that there are ways in which horses are superior to us. I don't want to. The human species is very mixed, right? We all know that, but it's just something to behold that here we are, and not just caring, but dedicating our entire lives. Well, you are dedicating your entire lives to relieving suffering and helping, and that is, I think it's an example of the deep evolution of heart and mind that has taken place, right? And I would also, another comment is that it's not exactly the American agenda either. And it's not the agenda of global capitalism, not really. In other words, you're
Even
already,
from Andromeda, you figured that out?
this group is already moving outside of those kinds of containers. So in other words, I see that we're part of a very, very deep process. So the one way to think about our moment is with all of these challenges, we're moving forward, and I as a way of giving us some hope, because I mean the suffering is going to possibly even increase, but the average mammalian species exists around 2.7 million years. Now, there have been so many species have come and gone, and we don't like to think about the human species ever leaving. But I mean, and maybe we're not average. We're above average. But let's just imagine we're just an average mammalian species. We've been here for 200,000 years. 200,000 years over to our whole tenure of 2.7 million years, that's something like 7 or 8%. We've just begun really, the vast majority of our time is in front of us. And so here we are, we're working these things out. I mean, so what is ahead of us is unknown, but what is in evidence here is that the development of a deeper heart, deeper mind understanding. Last comment.
No, you can speak forever as far as I'm concerned, but I have one question about this, which is, yeah, I agree, we're kind of like a little speck of carbon, but what we seem to be really ahead of the other species in doing is destroying the Earth. And, you know, we may only have been here a couple hundred thousand years. It's plausible that we're not going to make it another 1,000 as a result of our activity.
Michael, what I've noticed is every time something positive is said, you bring up the negative.
Thank you. I'm very.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the chances are not great that we'll survive. I agree, but I'm trying to cheer us up here. You know, we got a lot of hard work ahead of us.
We have different jobs.
But because the disaster of the human is worse than anything in the last 65 million years. This was argued in the 1980s. And really, by the 1990s, the evolutionary biologists, the vast majority agree that there's nothing this destructive. When I say this destructive, I mean us and what we've done. And the major destruction is the agriculture, the elimination of habitat, elimination of species. But now
so I'm the person that's bringing us down. Just wanted to be sure.
But the last point I want to make, though, is that, I mean, I think because this, you know, the power of reason and power of symbolic language it's so new. It's never been done before. So we're trying to find our way. And we've been using this power for very small concerns, you know, the nation state or Intel or whatever it might be. And we start to realize something larger is taking place. But in terms of this question that came up a number of times, which is the way in which the rural community has been something that we've wanted to leave, right? The best and brightest are moving away from it. So I think, in part, one of the great achievements of 400 years of modern science is it enables us to see what the reality of our situation is in a way that no one before really did. And that would be this. Life has been on this planet 3.5 billion years. It wasn't until the last 600 million years that topsoil was created. Topsoil is a very recent creation. I mean, the topsoil, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but in the perspective of evolutionary time, its significance shows itself in a new way. That's what I'm trying to say. So that this little thin layer of topsoil and water, so thin on the planet, that is one of the great achievements of the entire universe. And the people that are involved with that are, in a certain sense, the closest to the ultimate mystery of the universe. And so that, as opposed to being something that we push away and get away from, my guess is that part of our evolution will be the recognition that there is really no more essential human activity and nothing more desirable, more significant, more holy than farming. This will be the understanding from the point of view of the evolution of the universe. One last line. I think this relates directly what many of you have brought up, the idea of commodifying food. There's something really wrong about that. In other words, maybe it worked for a while, but there's something about commodifying water, commodifying land. There's something so wrong about that. It's a cosmological reality that is way, way, way outside of an economic box.
Okay, I have two comments. One is, who wouldn't want to take his class? And who thinks he's an optimist? No, that was really fascinating. And I agree. I mean, one thing is, we have a public health system, and I think we assume certain things are human rights in terms of health. I think we need to think that way a little more seriously about food and water. But but Jim wanted to say something.
Yeah, thinking, I'll see your pessimism and raise you.
Don't play this game with me, dude.
I mean, it's striking that at this time when we know more than we ever have in human history about the building blocks of life, and in terms of plants and food, we can map a genome so much more quickly than we could just 10 years ago. And yet, this is the time when we're destroying the diversity of, the libraries out there that we would actually use our new tools to do research in, is faster than it's ever been. And the scariest part of that is not, for me, even just the raw materials, the germplasm and the land races and things, but it's the people who develop those, right? It's farmer knowledge. Jonathan was saying farmers are smart. They're smart all over the world, and they're why we eat, right? And so this process of people leaving the countryside and leaving it much more quickly than in the past is, it's depriving us within a generation of huge stores of knowledge about location and breeding and what varieties work in a particular space. And so for me, that's the really terrifying reality of what's happening with the urbanization and the devaluing of agriculture.
Well, that's why I was saying in this country, I find it optimistic and exciting that there are a bunch of young farmers, I think in California, I don't know California as well as New York, who are really trying to move the dial on that. And it isn't very easy for them. And I think I hate to use the word we in this context, but they need help. And then when we get into the they need help, it's the private, the public, the who, and then I think we have a bunch of problems there, which we'll solve after lunch, of course.
But let's not make dramatic the native land races around the world. I mean, really, if we were living on the native land races, have you ever eaten teosinte? Well, look at a teosinte plant one day and look at modern corn.
That's a wild plant.
Yeah, but it was a cultivated plant that became something that is very different. And when you really consider most traditional land races, they are not robust to the environment. They are not carrying the future forward the way we'd like to. There may be wonderful things in those things. It takes 3 to 5 years to do an improvement on an annual crop. It takes 7 to 15 years to improve a tree. You don't have that much time. We don't have that much time. We need to really act. We have hungry people in the world that need the best science, whatever you qualify for that, the best utilization of natural resources. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. We got more coffee in the world because they cut down more trees, not because the trees or the bushes were more productive. We're reaching a point past equipoise. There is no more equipoise in the system. So if we want to go back to native land races, and I started a company that sold exclusively traditional heirloom seed called Seeds of Change, it was great, but it wasn't enough. Because the farmers in the organic industry wouldn't buy them because they weren't productive enough because they wanted hybrid seeds. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate talking about that, but we shouldn't romanticize it. The other thing, I think, Michael, that we didn't answer your question, which was animal nutrition. And it's not going to be necessarily cows, pigs, and chickens. It's going to be grass cutters and other animals that we normally do not eat in this country, which are the protein backbone in the rural sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, can I follow up on both?
We have about 5 minutes left.
I'll try to do it very briefly then.
Yeah.
But to go from the cosmological, I mean, the universe started out almost entirely hydrogen, right?
True.
Right, Brian? And it was only over time that other elements were forged in stars and so on. And the food system is a bit like this, and it's because of that cosmological fact. The food system is very good at producing carbohydrates, which provide a lot of calories. But it's a bit more of a challenge, requires a bit more attention to get the micronutrients that are needed. Right. And so that is minerals like iron or zinc. Mm-hmm. And the iron might be sometimes best delivered by a bit of animal protein, not a huge steak, but a bit. Or folic acid that you might get by eating an egg. not a dozen eggs, but keeping some egg layers in the household, and dairy likewise. So we need to look at but also looking at dietary diversity so that you are using the backyard of your home in the village to grow some leafy green vegetables or some orange flesh sweet potatoes to round out your food basket. And so nutrition really matters, and it really matters especially in the 1,000 days window, the development window that starts at pregnancy and runs through a child's second birthday. And if you get nutrition right in that period, it means you have a person who has all the capabilities they need to live, to be a productive member of society, to help their household, and so on. And if you miss, they're permanently stunted. The child is permanently cognitively impaired, and you can never make up for it. And so nutrition matters.
Yeah. A lot of these conversations.
I'll let everyone talk a little bit, even if I get yelled at.
Yeah.
Go.
A lot of these conversations happen with some very big general statements. How will we feed the world? Young people want to move out of this field. I just wanted to share a couple of anecdotal things. I totally agree with you what's happening in the US, this whole phenomena of young people, a lot of them from UC Berkeley that we are working with, are moving back into agriculture in a very holistic way. They face big challenges from credit to access to land, in some ways very similar to the issues that we're facing overseas. And perhaps before we go for lunch, on an inspiring note, in our work, again, there was this idea of a big investor from Iowa who had a deal of 800,000 acres, the largest deal ever in Tanzania, to start, a big industrial, farm where they were asking the government to change their policies so they can start growing GMO corn, which was to be converted into biofuels, and saying that nobody lives on that land. Over 160,000 people have been on this land, smallholder farmers who have worked with us, fought back. The deal is now stalled because people want to stay on the land and grow the food instead of becoming plantation workers. Similarly, in South Sudan, we saw a former US ambassador from Texas, Howard Eugene Douglas, get 1 million hectares of land for $25,000 with the promise of growing food for South Sudan. The community that has come back after a civil war finds out that the land that they plan to farm upon is going to be given away to a US investor, former ambassador for refugee affairs. They basically marched to Juba telling the president, don't even think about it. So people want to also stay on land and have their right to their livelihoods.
I agree with you, but I'm also told that I am not allowed to let anyone speak anymore until after lunch. All of you can think of your questions, and I will entertain them all after lunch when we solve all these problems. Thank you very much so far. Oops, I have all these things here. I just want to grab my stuff.
Is this on? How do you turn this on?
I don't know.
Can I do
Yeah.
this for a second?
Sure.
Whoa, maybe not.
No, it's kind of plugged into me. Here, let me just grab
Okay.
all these things.
So I just want to sum up for just a minute before we break. This has been a terrific panel that is coming back after lunch. And the lunch is going to be down where we ate breakfast in the Empire Ballroom. But I'd like you to think about, at least I'd like to share with you some of the things that I heard. And they are in no particular order, and I'm sure you could also summarize in many different ways, panelists, but I would like to say that one of the themes that I heard the panelists say was that we need to prioritize human rights, and that caring about others is something that our species is capable of doing and that we need to continue to do. I also heard that we need bottom-up listening. And I think cooperative extension out here in this room and the Ag Experiment Station does that a lot. And we need more of that. Another thing I heard was, let's not elect the wrong people. Okay? And a corollary with that is we can't generalize. Okay? And finally, I think I heard from you, Brian, that we have a better than average chance that we're going to be able to solve these problems. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Empire Ballroom.